Hello everyone, and welcome to the fourth content chapter on the mundane right view in the context of the lecture series True Dhamma following in the footsteps of the Buddha 2.0. My name is Dr. Florian Lau from the Dhamma Hub, and today we talk a bit about the very important view that carries you to the real right view, to the real stream entry that the Buddha was talking about. But first of all, a short overview of the content in this lecture series. We start, as pretty much always, with a short story time number 4, and then we try to understand the true source of suffering a bit more, and what the practitioner, the worldly person, does to alleviate their suffering, and what the noble one can do or not do to alleviate their suffering. There are two distinct ways that you can choose to deal with arisen suffering, or to deal with suffering in a way so that it cannot arise any longer. And then I want to illustrate that you likely do not know even the words that I'm using in many cases. And then we talk about the right view before the right view. As the Buddha said, the right view is twofold. There's mundane right view that ripens, in rebirth and craving and all those things, but can also lead you to heaven. And then there's supramundane right view. And then we talk a bit about all the wrong views that you have to dismantle to end up at the right view, because in the beginning you have to deal with quite a number of them. And then we talk about the Buddha's mundane right view and the real right view. Then we talk a bit about the practice versus meditation on just the cushion, because that is the view that many people hold, that meditation and the meditative practice plays out entirely on the meditation cushion, which could not be further from the truth. And then we define a number of mind states. And in the end, we have a short summary. But as always, I want to start with 5 minutes of restraint, or possibly even longer. You want to gladden your mind, you want to remove the hindrances from your mind, and that can only be done if you watch your intentions of great aversion and delusion very closely, and whenever you suspect any greed, any aversion, or any delusion that accompany any of your impulses or actions, then you should not do those actions. And like that, you calm the mind down further and further until gladness and relief arise, which give rise to joy and all the other things. And only then will the mind be ready to understand the talk on Dhamma that is going on right now. And this is very important. So if you don't have a glad mind, and this gladness has to be the result of sense restraint, of not engaging with the world, then you cannot understand the Dhamma. I will now pause for a moment so that you can pause the video and actually gladden the mind. Otherwise, everything you listen to will not find footing in your experience. Now a short pause. And now I expect that you are finished and we can continue with the content of the lecture. But in the beginning, I want to give you a short citation from the Suttas. The Uninterested Worldling from Majjhima Nikaya number 105. And there the Buddha explains, when a person is intent on worldly material things, on the objects of the senses, only talk concerning that interests him, and his thinking and pondering are in line with that, and he associates with that kind of person. But when talk about the Dhamma is going on, he will not listen to it, or give ear, or exert his mind to understand it. The problem is that we only listen to those things and to those people who we think share our interests. In one of the prior lectures, I have also explained that there is a sutta which is called walking back and forth or something like that, where those people with similar interests always tend to lump together, practice together, and become more aligned. And the same is true with the worldling and the person who is interested in practicing the Dhamma. And the worldling seeks a solution for their suffering in sensuality. And for as long as that seems to work, there is literally no Dhamma for him. If you think that your approach is working, you will not look for an alternative. That would be stupid. And from the point of view of a worldling, that would be stupid to practice the Dhamma, because whatever they are doing is clearly working for them. They do not know the limitations yet. So we need the right mindset that dismantles this view of the working capacity of sensuality. Without such a view that there's a limit to sensuality, we will not seeking for any alternative. And this is very important to keep in mind. So you cannot really preach the Dhamma to other people. They have to have a natural interest. As long as they think that their way is working, they will not exert their mind to understand the Dhamma. They will literally not hear it. They will not hear what you have to say. But let's now come to story time number 4. And I excuse in advance, I got a new keyboard which is mechanical. So you likely hear a clicking noise whenever I switch slides. But I think that's a minor inconvenience. Okay. Let's now come to the parts of the Buddha's teaching career that concerned itself with the first 5 ascetics, with the first 5 members who joined the Buddha. In Majjhima Nikaya number 26 and 85, and part of the Itipitaka, I think, the Buddha tells a story of the first few noble disciples that he used to set in motion the wheel of the Dhamma. He went back to the group of the 5 ascetics he was practicing with, but who abandoned him because they thought that the Buddha has returned to luxury. They were very much convinced that asceticism is a way out of suffering. And when you see another person who starts eating again, even if it's just a little, so that the body regains strength, then you will naturally think that that person has fallen away from the practice. And secretly, it seems, they delighted to see him back, but they did not really want to show it. And the Buddha did tell them that he wanted to teach, but they were quite doubtful, as he has stopped the self-torture. Yet the Buddha managed to convince them of his liberation and started teaching them the middle way. He taught them the Four Noble Truths, and Kodana was one of those people, attained stream entry first, and the teachings have been set in motion. As soon as you have taught the Dhamma successfully to one person, you are no longer a private Buddha, a Pacceka Buddha, then you are a real Buddha, a Buddha who set in motion the wheel of the Dhamma. That cannot be stopped by anyone in the world. It can only be stopped by corruption from the inside. Then Vappa, Bhadiya, Maha, Nama, and Asaji, who attained stream entry last of the 5, also attained stream entry. And after that, the Buddha also gave him a discourse on non-self later, and that led them to attain arahantship. So first they attained stream entry, and then after practicing on and on for a while, they also became arahants, because their minds were already quite tamed. For them, it was easy to understand the Dhamma, even if the Buddha had not much teaching experience yet. And then the Buddha moved on, and now we have, in the end of the slide here, 61 arahants. The next one was the clan's Menyasa, who was very rich and had many friends. And he, out of impulse, it seems, he left his mansion. And then his father, who searched for him, also went after him. And outside of his mansion, he met the Buddha, and the Buddha taught him the Dhamma. And he, as a clansman, attained arahantship right there. Then his father went out to search for him, and his mother, his former wife. And those two became the first lay followers. His wife, the first female lay follower. And successively, more and more old friends of Yasa came and became intrigued, and pretty much all of them became arahant. And in the end, there were a total of 61 arahants. And the Buddha did send them out to teach the Dhamma far and wide in different directions, so that he would generate quite some reach quite quickly, and a good reputation started spreading for the Buddha. He told them that there are beings with little dust on their eyes who will be lost through not hearing the Dhamma. Some will understand the Dhamma. That was his understanding. And the Brahmin, one very high Brahmin, Samapaji, I think, I always mix up those names, I'm very bad with them, convinced the Buddha of teaching. And so he did. And he was quite successful with it. I mean, after all, the Dhamma is still alive after 26 life periods for fortunate people, which is more or less 100 years. Anyway, let us now start with the content of the chapter, which is on the true source of suffering. The initial impulse of pretty much every person is that someone else is to blame for your own misfortune and your own suffering. Whenever you experience something bad, whenever you stub your toe or something like that, the impulse is usually to leap out to blame someone else who has put that there, who put the bad there, or the cupboard or anything like that, who left that lying around. And it's usually blaming the parent, blaming the spouses, blaming close friends. And if none of that, those are around, then you can blame the system. You can blame politics, capitalism. You can blame the patriarchy. You can blame the rich, eat the rich, or something like that. And all of that is wrong. This is exactly the way of the world. This is a way of sensuality. You seek the blame or suffering that you experience in the world of the senses, because the world of the senses is not good enough for you. It's not in your attitude of the sensual person. It is in the world. External events, cosmic misfortune, those things are to blame. All of this is wrong. The cause of suffering is in us. It is in our attitude, and it is not in the world. And this is one of the key understandings that you have to attain, even for the mundane right view. Because the person who has attained the mundane right view has understood that. They have understood craving as a source of suffering. They have understood all of that, but they have not taken it to the extreme. Even at the time of the Buddha, there were his prior teachers, the ascetics, the 5 people who spent time with him, and many others that he encountered over his 45-year-long teaching period, that had this mundane right view, who had already weakened craving to quite a significant degree, sometimes to the point of 60,000 or 80,000 eons on end, that they would be free from suffering because they have weakened their craving that thoroughly. This is what the mundane right view alone can lead to, if your actions follow in line with that. And then we want to have a short exercise. We want to understand that it's really not in the world, that the world is really not to blame. And for that, you can simply imagine sitting in front of your favorite dish. You can choose something that you love and where you could literally eat it every day for the foreseeable future. You can have as much as you want of it, and there's always more available. If you wish, just do it for real instead of imagining it to have a more profound effect, obviously. And let's assume you ate a few portions and now you're really full. After finishing, you can ask yourself the following question. Do you still want to eat more? Pause for a moment, ponder about it a bit if you wish. But the answer is quite simple. It's no. However, nothing about the dish has changed. And it's quite clear that the good and the bad about the dish is not really in the dish. It is in your mind. Your mind state dictates if the dish is something that you desire or not. You are responsible for your perception and interpretation of the dish. After all, the dish is the same as before and hasn't changed a bit. And the same is true and can be applied to basically anything in the entire world. So if you like sports or have been, playing soccer as a child and now you don't want to anymore, soccer playing has not changed at all. It is you, your attitude, that has changed. Your craving dictates to you what you like and dislike. Craving is controlling you. It is not you who control your experience. Craving gives rise to self, and self then has to fix the craving, pretty much. And this is one very important lesson. And I want to illustrate this using a Venn diagram. There are lots of things in the entire world that are beyond your control, and the world is pretty much the sum of the sense inputs. There are 3 ways that the Suttas talk about the everything, literally everything that is, was, and could ever be, which is the 6 senses. It's the Namarupa and Vijnana, and it's the 5 aggregates model. And then there's a very tiny thing of things that you can control, things that you deem yours, so to speak. The Buddha never said that there was no control, that there was no self. The Buddha said, whenever you examine something closely with wisdom, you will come to the understanding that it's empty of self. But with ignorance of this emptiness of self, there is control. This is what the entire chain of dependent origination shows you. And there's only a very tiny amount of things that you can control. And this is always given some uncontrollable circumstances. You are thrown into the world of the senses. The senses throw stuff at you. And within whatever the senses throw at you, you have a degree of control. But most of the things are way beyond your control. And everything that you think you have control over is based on something that you do not control. And this is a very important lesson that you will maybe understand in chapter 5. So in the end, it makes sense to fix yourself first. People usually love to fix others to avoid their own problems. It is the behavior of other people that has to change and not the own behavior. Even though you clearly cannot control other people, let alone yourself. How could you ever change the behavior of other people when you cannot even change your own behavior? Other people just as much cannot change their behavior, their actions, as you can. Yet most people try to fix others first. And the Buddha condemned this very much in the Dhammapada, which is very likely the most famous text when it comes to Buddhism, in chapter 12. And in line 165 he says, by oneself is evil done, by oneself is one defiled, by oneself is evil left undone, by oneself is one made pure. Purity and impurity depend on oneself. No one can purify another. You cannot purify another person. That's impossible. Let one not neglect one's own welfare and for the sake of another, however great, which is also very important, however great. Clearly understanding one's own welfare, let one be intent upon the good. And I think at one point Ajahn Chah even said, it is even more important to stop doing the unwholesome than it is to do good. And this is a very important lesson. It is much, much more important to stop doing evil things in the world than to actually start doing good things. Doing good things can be seen or viewed as a byproduct of no longer doing evil things. Yeah. And in the end, the Buddha even said in Majjhima Nikaya number 8, that one who is himself thinking in the mud could pull out another person that is impossible. If you have not understood the way out of suffering, you have a very limited capacity to help other people out of suffering. You can help them exactly in those domains where you have understood the way out of the problem that you have experienced. It is just like a car mechanic can repair a car because he has understood a car. If you have not understood how to repair cars, then you cannot teach other people how to repair cars. The best you can do is, to the best of your knowledge even, refer them to another person where you think that they have understood how to do it. And even then, your judgment could very much be clouded. By then, you are still going by faith. And even your referral to other people would be tainted. So before you start helping other people, it is very important to focus on yourself, fix your view, attain stream entry, attain the right view, and then you can start helping other people. If you start doing it before that, chances are that you do more harm than good. Only ever try to help other people in a domain where you have a thorough understanding how it works. If you have mental health problems, by all means, and have conquered them, let's put it like that, by all means, help other people in that domain. But not when it comes to the Dhamma. Only help other people when you have understood it. Focus on yourself first. That is so important. It is all about this self-focus in Buddhism. It is about your personal liberation. You cannot liberate other people, even if some more modern traditions of Buddhism try to suggest that they have to liberate all beings in samsara or something like that. The Dhammapada clearly states, and that's not the only sutta, that no one can purify another. You can give them teachings, but if they follow them, the Buddha said, that is up to them and not up to the Buddha. The Buddha himself was teaching people, and they were ignoring what he said. In fact, most people were not ready to understand or practice what the Buddha was teaching. And that's okay. We help who can be helped. And most of the time, we are just leading by example and show other people by experience how superior such a lifestyle of renunciation truly is. Anyway, now, before I go into any length of content, I want to illustrate that you likely do not know what I mean. And this is very important. And I will emphasize it several times throughout this lecture, just to carry home this point, because it is so freakishly important. Understanding overall is very hard. The Buddha called wrong view the worst hindrance for a reason. It is literally more unwholesome than killing. It is the least helpful thing in the entire world. And it can block all progress for basically eons on end. And misunderstanding is pretty much what wrong view is. And communication is a huge aid for learning. Yet, communication rarely works as intended. So if I want to teach something to you, you have to be very aware of the fact that you do not know yet, and that I might have a different understanding of whatever you are taking from the words that I use. There are errors that occur more often than not. And people invented pretty much mathematics to avoid such errors. Mathematics is just a very precise language to talk about certain things in nature, or to talk about models pretty much. It's just a way of communication most of the time, with sometimes tricks or something like that. But in the end, it's very hard. And for example, modern politics kind of fetishizes even misunderstanding. Even the entirety of the modern culture does that. We willingly misinterpret people, and it's good to avoid all of that. In fact, I would advise, if anyone would listen to me, to stay out of politics however you can. Just participate in it to the minimum degree necessary, and do not bother yourself and weigh yourself down by listening to all the news or anything that is out there. Our mind likes to change our views as little as possible. We want to have something stable to hold on to, and views are much more stable than things in the world. We really like clinging to our views. And thinking works both based on axioms and things we suppose to be true, we assume to be true, and we presuppose the same in others. But views are wrong pretty much all the time. And even if views are right, that does not justify clinging to them, because that clinging to even a right view will bring suffering. And people mistake views and people. Words mean different things to different people, and when in question, give other people the benefit of the doubt. And I really like to illustrate this using this figure. In the middle, we have the eye organ, and the eye organ perceives something, like a tree. And then we have a mental image that you could take as mindfulness, so to speak, a memory of that tree. And there are all kinds of associations with that, or proliferations, how the term in Buddhism is used. There's a hedonic tone, which is displayed in red and green, which has a degree, pretty much. And then there are all kinds of other associations. It might be small, an oak, part of a forest, boring if you are not a person who is interested in nature. But the point is, this subjective experience of a tree, which is pretty much displayed to the right, varies from person to person. Another person might have a completely different interpretation of the perception of such a tree. There might be a different hedonic tone. For most people, it will be a different hedonic tone. It might be much bigger because you are much more learned when it comes to nature, and it might not be boring at all. The point is, it is completely subjective. What we have access to is in reality experience of a tree and not really a tree. When we look, for example, at a picture frame, and someone asks you what is on there, what are you seeing, then most people will reply in terms of the content of the picture. Might be a picture of a cat. They will reply, I see a cat. A person who is a bit more detached would say, I see a picture of a cat, an image of a cat. And a person who is yet more detached would say, I have an experience of seeing an image of a cat, which has certain colors or whatever. Anyway, let us continue. And the same is also true, for example, for the former president of the United States, which probably has a negative connotation for the vast majority of people. The point is, all of those things are subjective. What we have is subjective experience. Yet another person might view such things completely different. The Buddha, for example, and this is very important, or someone who has understood the Dhamma, has a very different understanding of the term feeling, as an example. If you understand the term feeling as the wording at the top, you very likely have an idea about sensations, about emotions, because the term feeling is so overloaded. It has the connotation of having sensations in the body. It has a connotation of good and bad and neutral. It has a connotation of all the emotional ranges in the entire world. Yet when the Buddha talks about feeling, he talks about Vedana, good, bad, and neutral. And he talks about dependent origination maybe sometimes, and lots of other things. He talks about Upadana, about Vedana, about Tanha, and lots of different things. Yet even an enlightened one has this hedonic tone applied to their experience. They still have preferences. They still have experiences that feel good and experiences that feel bad, but they have exhausted craving and clinging in regards to their experience. But the point is, we want to align our own understanding, which is the understanding of a Bodhijana usually, with the understanding of the Buddha or a noble disciple who learned this understanding from the Buddha. And once perfectly aligned, then we will see truly aligned with how things really are. And this might be one of the most important slides of spiritual progress. To end up at the right understanding, you usually require many iterations of relearning things and revisiting things over and over again. You likely have to contemplate until it really clicks. The understanding of dependent origination, the breakthrough to the Dhamma, the right view that is displayed in the suttas, is an experiential understanding. You experience dependent origination. It's not an intellectual understanding. And this is very important. So until it really clicks on that level, you are not seeing certain things. And this is what I really want to illustrate. There we have a box to the bottom left. This is what suffering really is, what craving really is. And then we have your idea, or the idea of a practitioner, of a worldling. And this is, by the way, not a negative term, even though many people use it nowadays as a negative term. It is your idea, your view on suffering, your idea what suffering is according to you. And if this idea was truly what the Buddha was thinking, then you would be free from suffering, because the understanding of suffering is the way out, is the cessation of suffering. And this is very important. So when you have not exhausted suffering for yourself, or at least the vast majority of suffering for yourself, then you have not understood it. Your job is it to align this idea of suffering with what suffering really is. And this is kind of important. This is what you want to do. And this is a very big task, I would say. And it's very important to get this one right. And you have to revisit all the terms that are mentioned in Buddhism and align them like this. Yeah. And this is pretty much the difference between syntax and semantics that we often talk about in philosophy, and computer science is partially founded on philosophy. And there you can have a short experiment. Think of a stop sign. Usually those are hexagons or octagons. I'm not sure, hexagons or octagons, at least in Germany, with a red border and a white middle or something like that. There are letters on it, maybe. There are colors. It has a position in space. However, where in that stop sign is the information that you should stop your car when you encounter one of those signs on the road? The answer is nowhere. The information is in your mind. This is what I illustrated with one of the mind maps. It's subjective, and it exists in relation to the material world. Knowledge and understanding are semantic properties, I would say. They cannot be found in the central objects themselves. The syntax is defined by those sent inputs, by the distinguishable physical manifestations, by the form of states. And any matter that can be distinguished from its surroundings can also be assigned a meaning, which might be papancha, which is already proliferated meaning, or it could be intentionality or sankhara attached to it, the subjective meaning to it. However, that meaning is a property of your mind and not a property of the object in question, not an object, a property of the object in the world. And this point is so important because people get it wrong all the time. And unless you get this kind of detachment, this kind of understanding, there's no real progress for you when it comes to the Dhamma. And now we have a very important slide about self-deception. Because our mind tricks us on various different levels. We not only misunderstand other people, but we misunderstand and deceive ourselves. We think we understand, but in reality, we do not understand at all. Yet our mind convinces us that we already know everything and that we should not revisit certain terms. As soon as we know a word, usually just the middle of those mind maps that I have shown you, then we stop questioning and we just assume that the rest that is attached to this core concept is the same as another person is meaning. Having a meaning for a word is enough for most people to stop understanding or progressing any further. We need the meaning that the Buddha was talking about. And you could call this a Dunning-Kruger effect, where you ignore everything that you could know. And we understood something at that point. Yet we mistake it for the correct understanding. And there's a huge difference usually between both of those remaining. And there's a lot of intellectual honesty, self-honesty required, and you have to frequently self-test. Am I really free from suffering? Is suffering still arising in my experience, the same way as it has been arising before? And most of the time, the answer is no, and we have to press on and really tame the mind so that it stops doing this kind of self-deception. Without self-honesty, there is no path. Sotapanna has lost the capacity for self-deception. He can no longer lie to himself. And this is very important. Okay, but let us now come to the right view before Sottapatti. And there is a worldly kind of right view. As an example, famous people like Charlie Munger have also called it right view, which is a right understanding, and he even called it a divine gift. Sadly, he is deceased by now. He died at the ripe age of 99, I think, so he very likely had very good karma. And he was a very wise person by mundane standards. And even the Buddha said that there are two kinds of right view. He said it is twofold in Majjhima Nikaya number 117 and essential. There's mundane right view, and then there's supramundane right view. The mundane part applies in any area and reaches much further than most people think. The mundane right view alone, if you push it to the limits, can literally free you from all suffering for 80,000 eons on end. And an eon, the Buddha gave a very good simile for that I hopefully have integrated into the slides, is a very long time. The mundane right view alone is pretty much the understanding of virtue. Virtue leads to non-suffering, leads to a superior abiding here and now, but it still has problems. It is still a limited state. It still has a beginning and an end. Craving is a maker of limits. And if you think that you have understood the Dhamma, and if you are free for 60,000 or 80,000 eons on end, then you will very likely think that you have understood it. Then you will make no additional effort at understanding. And not understanding is the starting point. We will think we understand many times before we truly understand. And the Buddha's mundane right view is like a very good, at least the very early part of it, is like a very good contemporary, wholesome or self-improvement mindset. But it goes far beyond that. If you truly understand craving on basically all surface levels as suffering, that is still part of the worldly mundane right view. And in a very mundane example, you could think about a new strength athlete, which is usually very relatable to young males, and those are the majority of my audience, as I think. Then you very likely start educating yourself. You watch lots of videos, you might have read a book, and if you have high testosterone levels and are still intoxicated with youth, then you likely think yourself to be an expert in the area already. Imagine you left out certain videos about warming yourself up before starting to lift weight. And it works in the beginning. You do not warm yourself up. Why would you? It worked. Yet the problem is a wrong view. You assume that you do it right, but you don't do it right. And in the end, you will likely hurt yourself. Because if you don't warm yourself up, the steps that you do when it comes to weight are not gradual enough. And this is not good for the body. And the likelihood of getting hurt increases very likely exponentially as soon as the weight gets kind of heavy. And this wrong understanding is a very tricky poison, as it fools you into believing that you are done already, even though you are not. And you need quite a bit of self-honesty to go beyond it. And this is also the first mundane step if you are on your way to practicing the Dhamma. You have to accept that you might be wrong at literally every given moment. Your own history of improvement disproves your current assumption of being right. If you were right all along, yet you still make progress every single day, how could you have ever been right in the past? And why would you assume to be right now? That would be a foolish assumption, yet it goes against our ego conceit, and our ego conceit tells us that we are right. This time, in this present, I am surely right. And we can conflate wrong facts with us being wrong. And if this goes against our self-perception, it negates our self-perception, then we have a lot of aversion against it. And progress is only really possible when you think that there is something to progress to. Self-honesty and responsibility are necessary to even find your own shortcomings, let alone to fix them. And the brain usually rationalizes those things away, and you need a lot of patience. Otherwise, you will never do that. You have to revisit those things on and on and on. Because most of the time, we only gain a tiny bit of understanding. We gain a tiny bit of rightness. And every tiny bit of rightness is a very good thing. But we have to be entirely right to eliminate suffering for good. And this, again, requires lots of contemplation, lots of revisiting, and most of all, lots of practice, lots of purification of your intentions. You want to purify your intentions from greed, aversion, and delusion. Only based on that can you truly understand. And this is kind of the understanding of the mundane right view. And again, self-honesty and responsibility are so important because we are responsible for every single action of greed, aversion, and delusion. In a sense, and I will very likely say this quite often through the course of this lecture, we are the doers of our suffering. We do fuel, we actively keep our suffering on life support. We are responsible for it. And accepting this, acknowledging this, requires so much self-honesty, so much humility. This requires quite an advanced mind and quite a bit of prior training. Otherwise, we will not understand this. This is a very uncomfortable understanding initially, but it's a very liberating understanding ultimately. We will only try to change what we see as in the domain of our responsibility. And many people overshoot the mark even. They think that nothing is within the domain of our control, and which could not be further from what the Buddha has been teaching. Our suffering, the only reason that can be stopped is because it is in the domain of our control. We can stop doing our suffering based on that, based on humbleness, based on patience, based on the mundane right view. And faith, which could be described as a delay of disbelief, is necessary when checking the facts is not possible yet for you. It still requires faith as fueling is indirect, so we cannot see this connection immediately. We have to put it into practice so that we experience the results. And then upon experiencing the results, we have the experiential realization of dependent origination, of the end of suffering. And even this can be just mundane. You can get rid, on a mundane level, of the entirety of your suffering, pretty much, for 80,000 eons on end. And again, an eon is a very long time. But this is how far this mundane right view can take you. And you have to refine your views to get there. And even the people who have made it to the 80,000 eons freedom level of suffering, they still have to refine their views because they are not entirely done. If you don't have the mundane right view, you must cultivate it gradually. If you are a 9th level jhana attainer or something like that, or an 8th level jhana attainer, and you still hold wrong views, then you would not be an arahant and technically inferior to a mere Dhamma follower or a faith follower. And you must ponder a lot to end up at the right view. Ponder if you fix symptoms or ultimate problems. If you just weaken your craving, then you are fixing symptoms. It is a more reliable, more permanent solution than sensuality. And in that regard, it is surely a good thing. But it does not fix the problem on the ultimate level. You do not pull the ultimate root of self-conceit. So don't be content with half-knowledge. Gather knowledge and refine your understanding. Yet, don't read for reading alone. Don't be addicted to gathering knowledge. And this is, again, a very good rule of thumb, I think. 5% of your time, initially a bit more, but overall 5% of your time should be spent reading, 15% pondering and understanding and making sense of it if you're an intellectual person, and 80% of your time, the vast majority of it, should be dedicated towards practice at all times, not just on the meditation cushion, not just in the sitting posture, in all postures. And this is very important. You must practice while sitting, standing, walking, and lying down. The Buddha emphasizes this so much. In all postures, at all times, must craving be weakened and later uprooted. If you don't do that, then you are not doing anything when it comes to Dhamma. Because the Dhamma really starts once you have attained the true right view. This is the beginning of the Noble Eightfold Path. And now we have a lot of talk about wrong views because they are so important. There are infinitely many wrong views. And Ajahn Chah said at some point, we don't really know anything, and so we are fooled by people's lies. They point out what is right as being wrong, and we believe it. And that which is wrong, they say is right, and we believe that too. This is because we are not yet our own masters. Our moods lie to us constantly. We shouldn't take this mind and its opinions as our guide, because it does not know the truth. Instead, we should rather take refuge in the Triple Gem, and rather take Buddha's word and put into practice what he said, and then observe the effect. It is very important that whatever you practice yields results. And in the Anguttara Nikaya, number 10.104, it is said, just as when a nymph tree seed, a bitter creeper seed, or a bitter melon seed is placed in moist soil, whatever nutriment it takes from the soil and water, all conduces to its bitterness, acridity, and distastefulness. Why is that? Because the seed is evil. In the same way, when a person has wrong view, wrong release, and everything in between, whatever bodily deed he undertakes in line with that view, whatever verbal deed, whatever mental deed he undertakes in line with that view, whatever intentions, whatever determinations, whatever vows, whatever fabrication, all lead to what is disagreeable, unpleasant, unappealing, unprofitable, and stressful. Why is that? Because view is evil. With an evil view at your root, whatever you do will ultimately lead to suffering. Even if you make a short break in a higher heaven, ultimately you will suffer again, because a person who has spent some time in the higher heavens is very likely to be reborn as a lower creature instead, as low as the animal realm, or hell, or even deeper. This is also important. And there are two chief wrong views, namely the view on determinism and the view on annihilation. And there are examples like this world is not real, nothing good or bad, no beings are reborn, Nibbana and Samsara are the same, the self becomes non-existent after rebirth. And there are quite a number of examples, especially in Digha Nikaya number 2 and Majjhima Nikaya number 101. One does not act of one's own volition, another's volition, a person's volition. There is no power, no energy, no human strength or vigor. You have no say in the entire process, so to speak. All sentient beings, living creatures, beings, all souls lack control, power, and energy. Molded by destiny, circumstance, and nature, they experience pleasure and pain in the 6 classes of rebirth. Fools and wise upon death are destroyed and perish. They do not exist after death. This is a view of annihilationism. And it's a very wrong view. What they essentially say is everything is predetermined. The entire universe is a large computation, and whatever you do does not matter. It is predetermined in advance. And this is part of the Norse mythology as an example. There are Norns who are the weavers of your destiny, and they are determining what you are doing pretty much. So whatever effort you undertake either is predetermined, and your own effort does not really matter. And this does not lead to striving. This does not lead to liberation. Determined, however, is not predetermined. Yet, take responsibility for acts of greed, aversion, and delusion to avoid non-doing, to avoid inactivity, because this kind of view will lead to not doing anything at all, or to only following your immediate impulses. Yet it will not lead to the Dhamma. The Dhamma requires us to still do a certain class of actions, namely all those acts of non-greed, non-aversion, and non-delusion. Everything that allows us to strive onwards, like eating, and all the 4 requisites that the Buddha mentioned. Those are still necessary. What we should not do is actions of greed, aversion, and delusion. And this is what the people frequently misunderstand. They have no concept of that there are actions that are not accompanied by any kind of corrupted, unwholesome intention. And then there's the other extreme, which is eternalism and speculation. There are external gods who created the world, and the goal is to have union with this entity. And salvation would be the recovery of the eternal. And the Suttas say in Digha Nikaya number 1, he amongs a certain ascetic, by means of effort, exertion, he remembers 1, 2, 3, a million lives, and a million or 100,000 periods of world expansion and contraction. And the self and the world are eternal, he deduces. It's barren like a mountain peak, set firm as a post. Then, beings rush around, circulate, pass away, and re-arise. But this remains eternal. There's a true self that you can go back to, because their memory reaches quite far into the past. They can remember many millions or even eons of lives. And they deduce, they infer, okay, there is something eternal because I am watching this. I'm watching all of this with my sense of self, with a very high and very detached sense of self. But they still have the wrong self-view, because this wrong self-view is like understanding what is inside of a black hole. It's basically impossible without the help of another who has already understood what is in there. Then they can tell you. But it's beyond the horizon of what we technically could understand. And this is what people usually don't understand when it comes to the grandness, to the genius of the Buddha, what he did as a self-awakened being. Yet this view of eternalism leads to a lot of speculation about future self, soul, about the infinity or eternalness of the world, about non-causality, and there are also views of ear-wiggling. Ear-wiggling is just people who do not decide on any view at all, pretty much. And the Buddha called them the most confused of them all. But all of those lead to non-doing too, just like the views on annihilationism. Or rather, it leads to stopping short of the goal. That would be a better way of phrasing it. And this is all based on wrong assumptions about space, time, external, and especially self. Buddha even said that there are certain ascetics that understand that virtue is empty, that virtue is not enough. There are even ascetics who understand that pretty much all the fetters except the fetter of self. The self is always what remains. And a stream enterer knows all those views as wrong by experience. And so he does not follow any of them. Instead, he has a firmly established view and faith that the Buddha, that the Triple Gem is right, and that they have been practicing the good and the straight way towards liberation. And this is the view that you need. So if there's any doubt, if you are still following any other teacher, then you can be quite certain that you are not a stream enterer yet, or ultimately follow another teacher. If you are looking anywhere else but in the suttas, I mean, you can use other people or other modern individuals as aids in understanding. But in the end, you kind of always go back to the Buddha and are pretty happy that he has discovered the Dhamma. So you have to abandon all your wrong views, gradually abandon all your wrong views, so that only right view will remain. It is about removing obstructions that hinder you from putting in the necessary work, because that is what your views do. They lead to you putting in the work where it does not matter, or where it is even counterproductive. If you do not see a problem as a problem, you will not fix it. An alcoholic, as an example, or any kind of addict, can only come clean of their drug when they acknowledge their condition. If you don't see a solution as a solution, you will not implement it. This is again a wrong view. Cultivate and refine your understanding of you, of wholesome and unwholesome. This is quite a big chunk of the work before stream entry, even the majority of it. If you also put in the work of purifying your mind, otherwise you will not see it. And only based on that can you put in the work where it matters, based on understanding the way that leads out of suffering, based on implementing the way out of suffering, and based on knowing the way. A monk from southern Germany, Ajahn Metiko, always says, right view is a bit like when shooting with a bow, is knowing where to hit the target. But you still have to hit the target. You still have to practice. You still have to pull the string of the bow and then hit the target. Knowing the target is not yet enough. You still have to put in lots of effort, lots of training. And ways of practicing this are, for example, based on self-interrogation. How can you straighten your view if you are fully convinced that your view is already right? Well, you can test if you have right view yet, or even mundane right view yet. It's unmistakable though, I would say, through self-interrogation. Or you could put your knowledge and understanding forward to people who you deem as noble individuals or people who are more advanced than you, and have yourself questioned and interrogated by them. Or ask yourself, do I suffer? This is nothing that anyone else can answer for you, as much as before experiencing the same circumstances. And if so, why? And this why is so important. Do I get rid of arisen suffering? Do I weaken craving? Do I manage craving through, for example, sensuality? Or does it not arise anymore? Do I avoid suffering? Or can't it be anymore? Can't it come to being anymore? Do I fully understand all the different words that the Buddha was using? Do I understand feelings, craving, mind, suffering? Do I understand the Four Noble Truths? Or are they still very slippery and vanish from my mind as soon as I dedicate my attention to something else? Am I drawn towards seclusion, towards renunciation, or do I delight in social situations? Do I understand why this is the case? Is my mindfulness, my recollectedness, my memory, is it increasing? My memory on Dhamma, not any kind of memory. It's memory on Dhamma. Do I understand why that is the case? Do I still doubt the meditative practice? Do I still doubt the Dhamma? And if so, in what area? Where am I still lacking knowledge? Is there a fundamental doubt that is plaguing me, that is feeling really bad, where there's still a very strong urge to get rid of that? Do I understand with certainty what makes me suffer and how to immediately escape it so that it cannot arise? Or do I only understand how to escape it when it arises? Is the motivation behind my actions rooted in greed, aversion, or delusion? Can I even see greed, aversion, and delusion? Do I even know what that is? Do I believe in teachers or practices because it sounds agreeable or because it is true? Truth can be very uncomfortable. And even the truth that the Buddha teaches is not very agreeable at first. In fact, most people will hate it. They will not even think about it. They will think of it as stupid. If you, for example, tell them that the Buddha advised people to not kill, but they still ate meat, then they will think that you are stupid or something, because their entire understanding of wholesome and unwholesome is completely on a different level than that understanding of someone who has seen the Dhamma. They know where the real problem lies. The Buddha even said, a dead animal at least has a use. You can eat it and sustain the body for a bit longer. Yeah. Yet, you have to see the danger in the slightest fault. If something is not 100% wholesome, it's better to avoid it. The Dhamma practice is about understanding experiences, not about a mythical content. And we fall back from the Dhamma if we have not yet understood it. Usually very bit by bit, in very tiny pieces. We rationalize tiny bits of giving in, and in the end, we are fully falling away from it. And this is very important. Yet, when you put in the work, then the Buddha promised us that you will end up at liberation. Yet, you need a good reason to put in the work. There are only 3 good reasons to put in the work. And the one is based on wisdom, based on understanding, making your understanding straight, making the way very palpable, very understandable, very straight, so that you can just walk it. The other is based on faith, and the last one is based on having a good abiding here and now, namely based on samadhi. And from a sutta, the Buddha pretty much said, bhikkhus, when a bhikkhu is not intent on development, even though he forms a wish, even though he wishes to be liberated from suffering, may my mind be liberated from the taints by non-clinging. Yet, it is not the case. His mind is not liberated from the taints by non-clinging. For what reason? Because he lacks development. He has not put in the work where it matters. Suppose there was a hen with 8, 10, or 12 eggs that she had not properly covered, incubated, and nurtured, turned around and everything, what a hen does. Even though she might form the wish, may my chicks pierce their shells with the points of their claws or beaks and hatch safely, yet the chicks are incapable of doing so. For what reason? Because the hen has not properly covered, incubated, and nurtured her eggs. She has not done the work. And not doing the work is usually caused by not having a good right view, a good understanding. Suppose there was a hen with 8, 10, or 12 eggs that she had properly covered, incubated, nurtured, turned around every now and then. Even though she might not form the wish, may my chicks pierce their shells with the points of their claws or beaks and hatch safely. Yet the chicks are capable of doing so. For what reason? Because the hen had properly covered, incubated, and nurtured her eggs. She has done the proper development. And this is from Anguttara Nikaya, Book of the 7th, number 71. So if you do the right work, the results have to follow. You just have to be patient and continue doing your wholesome conduct and continue refining your views. If you do that, nothing else but the right view and the total exhaustion of the taints can follow. It is impossible that any other result could follow. Now we talk a bit about the actual sutta that I like to take when I talk about the difference between the mundane right view and the real right view. And it is again from Majjhima Nikaya number 117. And it goes as follows. Therein, monks' right view comes first. Again, very important. On the path to liberation, on the Noble Eightfold Path, right view comes first. But also on the path leading towards the Noble Path, the right view comes first. And what, monks, is a right view? Right view, I say, is twofold. There is a right view that is affected by taints, and there is a right view that is noble. And what, monks, is mundane right view? There is what is given, what is offered, and what is sacrificed. There is fruit and result of good and bad actions. There's this world and the other world. There's mother and father. There are beings who are reborn spontaneously. There are in this world good and virtuous recluses, renunciates, Brahmins, who have realized for themselves by direct knowledge and declare this world and the other world. Again, the last iteration I've taken this apart bit by bit, and I probably do it to some degree now. But essentially, this is just the understanding how craving leads to suffering and how non-craving leads to lots of good results in the future, how it will lead to rebirth, and how other Brahmins have realized that for themselves, and how you can learn from them to attain this mundane right view. It is a very wholesome kind of view that leads to a very long time without any suffering, without any craving, even without any state of being. Yet, you have left the deep roots intact. And this is a problem. And this is the only thing that is really special to the Buddha. Again, people have understood at the ancient times how to escape suffering for such a long time, so that literally nothing remained that could ever make you suffer, except for pretty much except for impermanence on the very deepest level. But that still remained. So all the suffering will come back. And you have to understand that your actions lead to your suffering. So there is fruit of and result of good and bad actions. Right view on what leads to temporary non-suffering. Temporary on the level of eons. You understand what behaviors lead to heaven and what other behaviors of body, speech, and mind lead to hell. Good leads to non-suffering for a very long time. Bad leads to hell and suffering for a very long time. And there are those who know and teach us. You have to put your faith in them, and if you practice what they teach, if they are good, if they are the real deal, then you will also reach that destination. And this basically cultivated true virtue that leads to this kind of semi-permanent, quasi-permanent freedom from suffering. And this right view on virtue is essential for the Dhamma to find footing in your experience. And then we are also affected by the wrong views and assumptions and thinking, which is what the Buddha called the most unwholesome thing. And we have to accept this wrongness as our starting position, to make this view more straight, more right. This is a right bit of view, to accept that everything that we view right now might be wrong. We tend to rationalize, ignore, and look away, ignore. This is the ignorance that the Buddha was talking about, by the way. We're actively looking away, being occupied with something else to alleviate our suffering. This is what we do when confronted with a neutral feeling, as an example. And the world as it is does exist. And it's not a meaningless particle clump, which is also another way for people to rationalize, or that people use to not suffer. That people use a view that people use to paste over experience as a whole to suffer less. To not be too attached to it. Yet still it has lots of limits. Yet we can't overcome suffering by simply memeing ourselves into no longer believing into the world. This will come back. While non-self can be true, it is not yet true for us. It is not a lived experience. The problem is on the level of feeling, not on the level of intellectual knowledge. And that don't work based on wrong assumptions. You start with an assumed wrong sense of self and control and must work through it by gradually refining it. You gradually put down the burden. You let go, but letting go is such an overloaded term that is so wrong in many cases, because you can let go in infinitely many possible wrong ways. So you have to let go in the right way. And in the end, you can use a bit of basic logic. There are laws of nature. There are both social and physical laws. There are laws on cause and effect, and on graduality. Those are kind of axiomatic. Our experience is just like that. And you should choose teachers who are in line with that. And the oldest suttas are usually a very good starting point. And I think that's also part of the mundane right view. Because they are free from contradiction and they are very logical, and the Buddha even insisted that they should be logical. You need initial faith and suspect that they might be true and that there might be something you can gain from them. And it is very important to keep in mind that your experience as a practitioner is antiloma, I think, against the grain. And the Dhamma goes against the grain. It goes against what you think to be true. It is very difficult to implement. And you have to cultivate right attention. And the mundane right view does enable this kind of right attention. Because only based on the mundane right view will you start cultivating virtue. And only based on virtue will right attention, namely womb attention or yoniso-manasikara, become available. And this kind of womb attention we talk a lot about in the next chapter, I think, which is a chapter on wisdom. No, in 2 chapters. And this allows you to see things and their sources at the same time. And this is necessary for verifying in your experience what the Sutta say. Go by faith until you can confirm it, but you need a lot of patience and have to put in a lot of work. Endless faith, however, is not necessary in Buddhism, yet you have to understand the core principles here and now. And all of the above is necessary to go to stream entry. Based on that, you can understand the principle of dependent origination. And this principle has to be applied in a spotless manner. Those ascetics of the past, they have partially applied the understanding of dependent origination, and that is possible to partially apply it. They have applied it on everything that is, for example, inferior to space, or consciousness, or nothingness, or neither perception nor non-perception. But this is the limit. They have applied it so thoroughly, but there's still something missing. Yet when the Buddha talks about the understanding of dependent origination, he talks about it in a spotless manner, that there's nothing left missing. Even the self-view is included. Okay, now we come to the content on the practice versus meditation. And again, there is a wrong view, one of the most harmful things when it comes to modern practices, that it's all about sitting on the meditation cushion. It's a very widespread belief that it is all it takes, just 1 hour in the morning and 1 hour in the evening, and you will be liberated. And this is complete nonsense. Absolute nonsense. Formal meditation is usually what people do, sitting with their closed eyes, and it's usually 1/15th part of the day. Or when they are meditating a lot, it's maybe 1/8th part of the day. Yet the meditative practice or Dhamma practice is what you do all day. You have intentions of great aversion and delusion, not just when you meditate or look at them very closely. You have intentions of great aversion and delusion literally at all times. Formal meditation is just one ingredient of the practice. You should do it. We are never against sitting when it comes to, for example, the Dhamma Discourse server. Sitting is fine. You should even sit 1 or 2 hours, but you should not neglect the rest of the day. And I would argue that watching and understanding your intentions at pretty much all times is much more important than just sitting. If you have to choose between the two, then just do the intention watching. And this will lead you much closer to liberation than anything else. It is a very wrong view to think that all it takes is to meditate to awaken. Yet, this would only be true if you think of what you do every day without greed and aversion would be meditation. Then yes, then the Buddha also agreed. The state without greed, aversion, and delusion is what the Buddha called meditation. Yet many other things are practiced too. So you have to broaden your view on meditation to include all those things, or just stop calling it meditation just when you sit. Yet there are lots of other parts of the practice. Just to give you a few examples, this is not an exhaustive list because someone in the comments asked on the old lecture. For example, associating with good and noble people is part of the practice. Informing yourself and trying to understand what the Buddha taught via books, resources, other people, discussion, interrogation is also practice. Keeping the 5 moral precepts is part of the practice, especially the one on right speech. Only speaking with a purpose. When you look into what the 5 precepts mean, then you can see that those are quite harder to keep than most people think. Refraining from actions that are rooted in greed, aversion, and delusion at all times, and understanding those intentions. Enduring bad feelings and not acting out. Not tolerating, welcoming, or delighting in unwholesome thoughts, words, and deed when you are already that advanced. But this requires you to be able to even see what greed, aversion, and delusion are. Otherwise you cannot understand, you cannot really put that into practice. You should try to be mindful during daily activities, as in non-distracted. You should remember the Dhamma and its significance. This is what mindfulness is. Mindfulness is not some meaningless watching of your movements while doing the dishes or anything like that. Mindfulness means, or mindfulness in terms of remembering, also always applies to the Dhamma or to the Vinaya, as in trying to remember the teachings that you have received. And then, lastly, there's also meditation on the cushion, where you just do all of the above in a more targeted manner. where you are less distracted, because you close your eyes for a time and just sit and then watch your impulses that you receive while sitting. But you also have to watch your impulses of greed, aversion, and delusion when walking and standing and lying down. You have to watch them at all times while speaking, even very important. Essentially, you want to cultivate a life of non-craving. You want to practice a lifestyle of a renunciate. Dhamma practice transforms your entire experience. You have to align all aspects of your experience with non-craving. Otherwise, whatever you do, whatever state of non-craving you cultivate, would have a beginning and an end, and would thus be limited. You have to abandon all greed, all aversion, and all delusion. You have to cultivate the value of renunciation. You must really see it. And this cultivation of that value of renunciation is one of the upadanas of sensuality. You have to overcome the fuel of viewing sensuality as pleasant. This is one of the preconditions of stream entry that is mentioned quite frequently in the suttas. And virtue removes suffering from your life, but it only weakens craving. Yet the Dhamma cannot find footing without virtue. Dhamma just ensures that craving and suffering stay away forever. But the work of removing it still remains. You still have to do your virtue. You still have to fix your conduct. And now to a few definitions on mind states and different words. And this is just a mean that I like a lot. When you are just starting out, there are so many words and you are so confused at the time. What is all this non-dual, this esoteric, this Vedantic? What are all those words? What is even important? What is not important? It's very hard to tell in the beginning. And you should not dedicate too much effort to understanding all of it. This is very important. It's much more important to just start practicing, to fix your view, to fix your conduct, to no longer do unwholesome things. This should be your main focus initially. All the other things will fall into place. There will be a moment when everything comes together, when your mind gathers in right samadhi, and all the other things start making sense. You do not have to read every book about meditation or Dhamma. In fact, that would be a big hindrance if you made that your task. You just need one good one, I would say. That's all it takes. Maybe a few suttas. Okay, but now to a disclaimer. For the next chapters, we need rough ideas, words, and concepts that I have already mentioned. We have some new ideas and words you already know, but those are often incomplete as mentioned before, as in the diagram with the two squares. If you understand what the Buddha meant with feeling, craving, or suffering, you would be an arahant. And the same applies everywhere. You have to understand words in your own experience. You have to become a living example of the Dhamma. Your entire life has to become like that. The terms and translations that I use are debated. They are not set in stone. People use different translations all the time, and I too switch my most preferred translation. What matters is meaning and not wording. Those words are just mere pointers to experiences when you do it rightly. And whatever pointer you use can work for some people, but will not work for others. And this is why many synonyms can be beneficial, but some will appeal more to others. When, for example, the Buddha was speaking to fire ascetics, he used fire ascetic words. When he was talking to farmers, he used similes that farmers can understand, etc. Always use words that work good for you. And it is good to understand the Dhamma in your mother tongue. For me, I'm a German, and it was very hard to understand the Dhamma based on just English translations. There are good German ones, but they are rare, and they are hard to get by. And when you have access, use something from your mother language. And now, one more slide from Majjhima Nikaya number 119, when it comes to mindfulness. This is a very important term that we must understand. And again, now we talk a bit about the words that we have to understand. And the sutta goes as follows. And how is mindfulness of the body developed? Having folded his legs crosswise, straightened his body, and having brought mindfulness to the force. And this is the translation that is usually used. Just keep mindful, he breathes in, mindful, he breathes out. And this translation of bringing mindfulness to the force might be one of the most confusing parts about reading the sutta. What does it mean to bring mindfulness to the force? In the end, what is displayed there? And I'm very confident when it comes to this translation. Should rather mean he remembers, this is what sati's mindfulness means, he remembers the teachings as he understands them. And based on that, based on whatever teachings he has received, he breathes in mindfully and he breathes out mindfully. Based on the understanding that he has developed, he remembers breathing in long. I know I'm breathing in long. Breathing out long, he knows, I breathe out long. Breathing in short, he knows, I breathe in short. Or breathing out short, he knows, I breathe out short. He remembers in this moment. Furthermore, when walking, the monk discerns I'm walking. When standing, he discerns I'm standing. When sitting, he discerns I'm sitting. Or however his body is disposed, that is how he remembers it, how he discerns it, how he sees it in this very moment. And this is all based on remembering what he has understood already, on remembering the instructions he has received, on remembering how he is currently understanding the teaching. You sit down and then you remind yourself on what you must do. This is what mindfulness is. And this is why the term mindfulness is used so vastly different in the suttas. Because you don't have to use the body. You can use feelings, you can use mindfulness of death, you can use all kinds of mindfulness. But it all means understanding the principle of virtue and the principle of Dhamma based on, for example, the body, based on, for example, feelings, based on the death, based on a corpse. All those things can be used as a basis for remembering. But you always remember dependent origination, otherwise it's not the Dhamma. And there are lots of other different words to contemplate. Yet the Buddha never taught things that are unrelated to liberation or awakening, unless he was talking with full-blown practitioners who wanted financial advice, which can also be okay nowadays, by the way. But understanding words fully means awakening or being close to awakening. It's important to really understand a single sutta. When you understand a single sutta, you're pretty much a Sotapanna. Yet if you still suffer, something is not understood. Dependent origination is especially important, as it is the only understanding that is unique to the Buddhas. You can only understand based on experience. You can only understand when you live dependent origination. Let's put it like that. You are living, you become a living example of dependent origination. Be careful of those words where you have some idea of them. It will change over time. And Dhamma videos have incredible rewatch value because the subtle meanings of those words only really become available when your view and your conduct advances in a wholesome direction. It's likely not what the Buddha meant, or you would be free from suffering. Try to understand terms like craving or tanha, feeling, vedana, self, atta or anatta, consciousness, vijnana. I always mix up vinaya and vijnana, but it's vijnana. Sankhara, anicca, dukkha, dukkha with a capital D, anatta, sati, sila, awareness, all those terms, you have to understand them. You have to have a very good understanding of them. Otherwise, it's very hard to make a breakthrough to the Dhamma. You don't need much, to be honest. The understanding of anatta, as an example, that is the one that really counts. But you can have lots of false understandings of anatta. And here is a short word cloud of terms that you can contemplate. They mean, and especially what they mean in your experience. This is the important part. What are they meaning? What are they referring to in your experience? And many of those words have no equivalent in your experience because you are not virtuous enough. Those terms only really have something to land on once your virtue is in place. When your virtue is not there, those words have nothing to land on. There's nothing that the teachings can bring you in terms of benefit. Study all those words. And then, based on that, you can make a breakthrough to the Dhamma. But anyway, let us now come to the summary of this chapter. What are the key points? First, most knowledge initially seems useless as it does not solve any immediate problems of yours. As mentioned on the first slide, if you still think that sensuality is a solution to your problem, you will see no value in Dhamma. So you have to first fix that. Most people have to encounter a divine messenger event. And words are mere pointers to mental models, and it's easy to misunderstand others and yourself based on your wrong understandings. You have to align your mental models, so to speak, with the mental models of the Buddha. And the Buddha called the miracle of instruction the biggest miracle of them all in Anguttara Nikaya, number 3.60. And mundane right view is necessary to even start developing virtue. You could even call it the right view on virtue, as you understand how to unsuffer yourself. But it's not yet permanent. And thus, it enables stream entry, because through virtue, you become a living example of the Dhamma. Then you can realize it. You can only realize something in your experience if your experience is actually like that. And this mundane right view includes things like self-honesty, responsibility, faith, accepting a state of flawed knowledge as a starting point. If you don't think that you are wrong, if there's something wrong with your experience, you will not attempt to fix it. And formal meditation is just a very small part of the practice. You have to practice at all times, transform your entire life. You have to become a renunciate, so to speak. You have to renounce everything related to craving. Refine your understanding of the Four Noble Truths and of unwholesome and wholesome. This, in combination with fixing your conduct, will lead to a breakthrough to the Dhamma. This is a guarantee. Anyway, I think that should be enough for today. This is another meditation that you can do to calm the mind a bit, to train it a bit. And again, what you do in such a sitting meditation does not really matter. What matters is that you make the mind obey your command. This is something that I did initially for a bit of time. But again, it's not something that you should do all times or something like that. It's not a magical method. It's something that you can do to transition away from the traditional meditation techniques. This is something that I still think that there's value in that. Most people are not willing to let go of something just like that. They need a gradual weaning off process. And this is what I'm offering with the meditations of the day. Otherwise, I would just say, sit on a meditation couch and do nothing. And when I say do nothing, don't do greed, aversion, and delusion. And if you don't do greed, aversion, and delusion, then that sitting will be the most divine abiding for you. But most people can't do that initially. But you have to gradually move away from those. Just start meditating without craving, as the Buddha suggested. Okay, if there are any questions, feel free to put them down in the comments below. Clive and I will likely take the time in the future to answer them. If you want to join the Dhamma Hub Discord, you can scan the topmost QR code. If you want to read the book, that is pretty much explaining the same content as this lecture, you can scan the second QR code. If you want paperback versions of the book on Amazon, you can scan the third one. This is for support only. It's the same ebook that you get for free. And if you wish to support me by other means, you can visit patreon.com. But anyway, this should be enough for today. If you want to continue watching the lecture, the next video will release in 2 weeks. Yeah, but until then, I wish you a good practice, much success, and a nice remaining Sunday.